I will be doing a few videos on this subject, so be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so when these videos come out you can pick those ones up as well. Alright, you ready? What's going on, everyone? Today I'm going to go over reloading. Some of the things I'm going to touch base on today is the equipment that you need and how to use it. I'll be doing other videos later on specifically why you do certain things with certain tools that you have available to you. So the first thing that you're going to need is your case tumbler. And what this does is vibrate at a pretty high pace, actually, with either media that's made of walnut, redwood, whatever you want to use, or you can use steel pins and detergent. My personal preference is media, but whatever you want to do is completely up to you. You're also going to need some dial calipers, case trimmer, press, and case preparation station. You don't necessarily need to buy one of these because you can buy each and every individual piece separately, which is actually a little cheaper than buying this whole thing. But again, whatever your preference is. You'll need a set of reloading dies. And each set contains your bullet press, your throat sizing, and depriming. And how you can tell the difference, your depriming will have this little needle at the bottom of it, and that's for pushing the primer out. Now this is very important. This is a safety issue. If you ever have to deprime a live primer, do it very slow. A live primer, they can jump up and bite you, and don't take it too cavalier. It is a small explosion, so you need to be careful. You're going to need a powder trickler. Now whether you do this with a digital scale or a triple beam, again, entirely up to you. The equipment that I have is just my preference. A triple beam and a digital trickler is probably going to be a little cheaper than the setup I have, but again, it's up to you. So let's go ahead and go over the steps needed to process your shells. First, you clean them. Now whether you deprime and size your throat before you clean them or after is entirely up to you. I prefer to do it after. I like to clean my shells as soon as I get done from range. That way when I do have time to reload, I don't have to worry about cleaning my shells for 20 or 30 minutes. Here's an example of a shell that hasn't been polished or deprimed yet. So we're going to go ahead and go over the depriming process, and we're also going to size the throat. When I put these dies onto the press, the shell holder, which is caliber specific, and which shell holder you need will be in the load data that you're using, which I'll go over here in a minute. I'll put the press all the way up, and then I will tighten the die down to the press, back it off a quarter turn, and then secure it in place. Anytime you run a shell through a size of any kind, you need to lubricate. And try and get just a little tiny bit inside the throat. And what's going to happen is I'm going to raise this up, and that pin is going to puncture that used primer out. And at the same time, you saw it fall out, it's going to size that throat to the diameter necessary, which is 308. A completed brass needs to be measured. And the information you're going to need for this measurement will be in your load data. In this case, it's going to be trim length. The trim length for a 308 for the recipe that I'm using is 2.005. This is obviously too big. This is where your case trimmer comes into play, and this part right here is also specific to caliber. And remember, the information you need for all of this will be in your load data. That's still a little too big. I'm going to keep rinsing and repeating this process until I get it down to 2.005 or shorter. I try and keep it within 5 thousandths of an inch, so I would be willing to go all the way down to 2.000. Now, the reason the length on the shorter side is not as important as it is on the long side is because if you try and chamber this round with this throat being too long, you run the risk of damaging the shell before you pull the trigger. And if that happens, it could possibly crack, explode inside your chamber, and you're just gonna have a bad day. So make sure that your maximum case trim length is at least lower than that. And like I said, I don't like to go any lower than 5 thousandths of an inch. So I would be willing to trim this down to 2 even, but no lower than that. That's pretty good trim length. That's exactly what I need, actually, according to the load data that I'm using. Once you have your case trimmed to length, it's time to prep your throat. As you can see, that's got a pretty rough edge on it. We're going to smooth that out so it tapers on both sides. That way you'll have a good seat on your bullet, and it will also make it easier to chamber the round. As you can see, that looks quite a bit better. You also need to clean your primer pocket and your throat just to get debris out of there so that when that primer does go off, it's not obstructed, and when you seat your bullet, it doesn't cause any damage to the throat or the bullet itself. As you can see, that primer pocket is pretty clean now. Always visually inspect it up against the light to make sure that there's no debris or obstruction inside that hole. Once you have your case prepped, now you can start putting together your bullet and your shell, powder, and all that good stuff. And again, I like to make sure that my press is all the way up. Spin the die down to the press, back it off about a quarter turn, and then tighten it down. Another habit that I think is a good idea is to make sure that this is backed out quite a bit. And what this is your bullet seating. This determines the depth of your bullet. Okay, your first step in this process is going to be putting a primer in your primer pocket. The rig up that I have, pretty simple. There are primers in this tube, and there is your primer seating pocket. I pull this back and then push it forward, a primer will be in that pocket, and it's fed through this tube. It'll lift, push it into that slot, which is what that slot is for, and then I'm going to press that primer into place. And there's your primer seating. Always a good habit to get into. Set your shell down once you have your primer in place and make sure it doesn't wobble. If it does wobble or seem unbalanced, then your primer is seated too high. Another handy little trick is to get one of these little blocks. And these are caliber specific. You see right there is 30-30, 270, 243, 308, which is what we're using. Place it in there, And if this isn't flush, then one of two things are happening. Your primer is either too high, and you'll be able to feel that with your finger, or your trim length is too long. If your trim length is too long, it will stick up ever so slightly, and you'll be able to feel it. Now that your primer is in, it's time to put the powder in. For this recipe, it's calling for 42 grains of Varget powder. Enter in how much powder you want. Hit go. And it will tell you how much powder is in there. If you don't get quite enough, you can get one of these powder tricklers, and just turning this knob, it will drop individual kernels in to get you exactly where you want to be. You can get one of these little funnels for putting powder into your bullet. Believe me, if you try and do it with your tray, it's not going to work out all that great. It's always a good idea to check that throat to make sure no powder, residue, or kernels are stuck in that throat. Now it's time for your bullet. And here's the reason why I like to make sure that this is backed off a quarter turn from the press itself, and why this is so far up. And it's so that I can make sure that as I'm putting this bullet in, I can keep adjusting down. Now the reason I want to adjust so that this shell goes farther down as opposed to putting it too deep, if I put it too deep, I have to rip this whole shell apart in order to fix the problem. If you seat it too high to begin with, this is the only adjustment you need to make. In this case, this round needs to be 2.764 max case overall length, which is from your head all the way to the tip of your bullet. I still have quite a ways to go, but I don't have to rip the bullet completely apart in order to fix the problem. All I have to do is adjust the depth of my seating. And I'm going to rinse and repeat this process until I get it down to where I want it. That's pretty close to where I need to be. So I'm going to go ahead and go with that measurement. And remember, this needs to be below your load data's indicated case overall length, which is a measurement from the head to the tip of the bullet. And that's the reloading process. If you found this at all helpful, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and thank you for your time.